Welcome, everyone. Come on, spread out a little bit here.
More.
Give you room to breathe. All right at the outset, I would like to go to you to define really what we're talking about, because in the past you've expressed concern that people too frequently conflate data privacy with cybersecurity. Why is that distinction important?
Cybersecurity is easy. Cybersecurity is protecting against hacking and things like that. And it's easy for policymakers, it's easy for CPOs because that gets a lot of media attention. The Equifax hack, for example. But consumer privacy is bigger. It's about our expectations. It's about negotiating what consumers want and need and expect from companies, and that can change over time. And companies tend to focus much more on cybersecurity just because it's so much easier to say, I'm going to protect my information from hacking.
Why is that a problem?
Well, because there's so much more to it. Because sometimes people give over information to a company and they expect the company to behave with that information with discretion or with confidentiality. And that has nothing to do with hacking or protecting the storehouse of information that you have. There's so much more to it, which is the reason why there's quite a bit more privacy that we need protected, and therefore the need for legislation like California's new Privacy Act and the GDPR.
Bruce, you just had a new book that just came out, Click Here to Kill Everybody, Security and Survival in a Hyper-Connected World. Scary title.
It's my first clickbait title, and I'm going with it.
Okay. What would you say, based on everything that you've done, all your research, all your interviews, is the greatest threat to consumers' privacy today?
So I'm probably expected to say something like hackers or China, but I think the greatest threat are the corporations that are collecting our data. That, right now, surveillance is the business model of the internet. So we are under surveillance all the time. I mean, this device knows I'm here. Our devices know it. We're all here. And it's just on and on. And the collection of this data, which in a sense is toxic, is what leads to Equifax having all that data that can be hacked, that leads to all of these privacy breaches.
This is what you call surveillance capitalism, right? Where everything from our refrigerators to our thermostats to our cars.
So I want to name
spying on us all the time.
I want to name check Shoshana Zuboff, who is a Harvard Business School professor, and that's her term. And it's a really good term for the type of market we're building on the internet, where our data is the commodity, we are the customers, and it's used for persuasion. Right? Governments use that data, hackers and criminals go after that data, and corporations use that data. And that's the core. So when I look at where we need to fix the problem, that's the place.
Harriet, I want to jump to you next. So one legal publication dubbed you the first lady of privacy. And you literally almost were. In 2000.
I haven't lived that down.
You were hired as IBM's first chief privacy officer, really one of the first in the entire world. And in that job for the next 12 years, you really laid the groundwork for how corporations today approach consumer data privacy. Yeah. As you look back now, or over the last 18 years, what are your concerns about how it's evolved?
Well, I've been doing this work in privacy and data since 1996, so it's been a long time. So I do have a perspective, and I guess I have concerns about our forgetting that on the boots on the ground need to have guidance, need to have information on how to do the hard job of securing information. And so what
who are the boots on the ground? Who do you mean?
Well, when I first started, I was named Chief Privacy Officer at IBM in 2000. That was a while ago. That was early. I think the people who had that job in industry, we got around a table and said, okay, so now what do we do? We're Chief Privacy Officers. What do we do? And we looked around and said, it's about the data. So let's go find the personal information and go do something about it. And ultimately, it's about data governance. The prior discussion was about governing the data. It really is about that. And so you use technology, you use policy, you use law, you use standards, and you make it work. And I think now, actually, in a good way, we have a lot more resources. That community of privacy officers has grown from about 10, 15, 20 people to now tens of thousands. There's an organization called the International Privacy Association of Privacy Professionals. It's about, I think, 50,000, roughly around that. And that is a growth market. That is a great field. Anybody who's interested in policy or law, this is a great field because there's enormous demand. So indeed, I'm not actually concerned about this area of privacy governance and working on these areas in business, it is an area where companies cannot get enough people who know what they're doing.
And the ones they're getting, do they know what they're doing? I mean,
There is
there's some
more
concern
and
about too
more
many attorneys
available.
being
Yeah.
chief privacy officers, and they don't really necessarily, not in the present company, accept it.
I will say what
have
I
the technical
said,
background.
Privacy is difficult because what do you actually regulate? What do you actually do? And one of the key questions is, what is personal information? What is information that identifies or is capable of identifying us? And one of the key problems, I think, with the new California law is that its definition is really broad and vague. GDPR, the European law, is also very, very broad. And so when you actually work on operationalizing privacy, what do you actually chase? What do you actually control? What do you actually govern? I think that's a really important issue. And one of the things that concerns me about privacy now and governing privacy and doing it in companies to try to protect and make sure that you know that you're doing what you need to be doing is making sure that you have a way of understanding what is information that needs to be governed. And I think it's practically all of it at this point, but you have to be granular about it.
Ari, in June during Cyber Week, you gave a really fascinating talk on designing with privacy. And the first point you made is that even when companies have brilliant chief privacy officers like Harriet, very often their vision of privacy doesn't end up getting into the devices, the technology that they're producing. Why is that happening, and what can we do about it?
Well, that's exactly right, and that's the reason why, although Harriet, you may not be concerned about the people on the ground doing the privacy work, I am very concerned about it, because it's not just people like you who care about it. There is a disconnect between chief privacy officers and the privacy professionals that may earnestly want to protect consumer privacy, and the engineers on the ground who are instantiating into technology products some vision of privacy, and their vision is different. The way we think about privacy is not trickling down, and not only because of engineer education, how we train them, and the fact that they have a trillion other things to do, and also the fact the lack of diversity among engineers, meaning that there are lots and lots of straight white men that are designing our technologies and don't consider how things like constant data tracking might be concerning for women and marginalized populations. But also, one of the recent innovations in the privacy compliance market are these hundreds of vendors, these technology vendors that have popped up over the last couple of years that large and small companies alike are outsourcing their privacy compliance duties. So with the passage of the GDPR, companies started saying, hey, you don't know what to do in order to comply with the GDPR, buy my product and I am a one-stop compliance shop. So now we have these technology vendors, many of whom employ 0 lawyers and 0 privacy professionals, saying that their platform complies with the GDPR.
Check the box and you're done.
Check the box and you're done. Right now, privacy all of a sudden is easy, but when you look at these products, they are maybe helping you with one part, or they're helping you with their version of what they think one part of the GDPR is, which could be completely different than what regulators in Europe or regulators in California or the FTC think.
Bruce, any thoughts on what Ari or Harriet have said? And I'd also like to go back to sort of where we left off. And what can we do to get companies to do more to protect consumers' privacy? I think many of us, back in the day at least, used to think there was sort of a fiduciary responsibility. If we gave someone our data, they were responsible for protecting it, right?
So it would be neat if there was a fiduciary responsibility, and that actually is a proposal, that we force people who have our data to be fiduciaries in the same way an attorney or a doctor is and have a special relationship. The problem is that the market doesn't reward privacy. Now, you mentioned Equifax. It's been the first anniversary of Equifax, I think, last week. That was a big deal. I was before the House. I testified. There were angry representatives on both sides of the aisle, and absolutely nothing happened. 0. There has been no change. Equifax doesn't really care. You're not their customers. You can't fire Equifax. They have your data without your consent or permission. They don't need it. And so what's missing is government incentives. That's why companies aren't getting privacy into products, because that's not rewarded in the marketplace. As consumers, we kind of don't care, right? I mean, I was happy to use Waze to get here. That's why I'm not late. But that was a surveillance-based, right, navigation system. And there's no privacy protection. Now, we could build that in. Waze is not going to unless they're forced. So I really look at government as the missing piece. to say you have to enforce privacy regulations. This is hard. You're talking about personal identifying information. It is very broad. Americans can pretty much be uniquely identified by birthday, not date, zip code, and gender. That doesn't sound like personal identifying information, but turns out it is. So it's very contextual and really requires a much firmer hand because the market is not going to do it.
Harriet, Bruce brought up an interesting point about how we are sometimes really happy to turn over data. You go to a website and you want to read an article and you don't want to pay for it, so you plug in your household income and other, sort of personal bits of information.
Absolutely.
Don't type in your mother's maiden name.
Yeah, don't do that. I agree with that. I agree with that.
Is our data then becoming some new form of currency? And is there a problem with that?
Data is valuable. Data is valuable, and we have known that for many years. But something's changed. There's no doubt about it. Something has changed now, and there is an appetite to do more about data privacy and to recognize the value that personal data has to us as individuals, in addition to the organizations that serve us. Yes, it is valuable, and you know what? If I share data with an organization, whether it's a government or a private company, I'm going to get some value back. I'm going to get directions. I'm going to get better health care. I'm going to get better financial services. I'm going to get better cloud type of services, and that is actually beneficial to me. But I think I agree with those who say, you know what, now it's time to do a little bit more. And I think maybe the thing that is more now is a little bit of a boost from national law, a baseline that's a little bit higher, that sets the bar higher than it has been, recognizing that there is no lack of laws in the United States on data privacy. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of laws that address many types of things, but it's time for a higher baseline. And I think that's really the digital currency or data as currency issue has been kind of one of those drivers that say, it's time to do a little bit more.
Ari, I thought it was really fascinating, the quote that Nikki Kristoff from Salesforce threw out there at the beginning. You have no privacy anymore, get over it. Do you think that's the case?
That's absolutely not the case. I think it's partly the...
He said that on stage here?
She was quoting someone else.
And she was like wearing clothes and...
I think there are a couple of things. Those kind of comments have been made by tech folks for quite some time. And it is only the case on their perspective, they don't want us to have privacy because they want our data, but it's because we think about, in the national consciousness, we are concerned about statements like that because we think about privacy so narrowly. I just published a book called Privacy is Trust, which talks about not just fiduciary proposal, but how narrowly and kind of neoliberally we define privacy as like privacy just based on secrecy or giving up control over our information. And the moment we give up control, i.e. give it to all these companies, then we've lost our privacy. But that's what they mean. And now all of these companies, what's fascinating to me, or not fascinating, what's ironic to me, is that all of these companies that have for years told us, you don't have privacy anymore, just give up, just press consent and give us your information.
Nobody even reads it, right?
No one even reads them. All of a sudden, you have these companies that now want a federal consumer privacy law because a little bit ago, Europe passed the GDPR and California passed the California Consumer Privacy Act, which provides some regulation on their collection of data. And now, suddenly, these companies that have extraordinary lobbying power in Washington, less so in Sacramento, and much less so in Brussels, want a federal consumer privacy law. And they want it because they know they can water it down. They want to preempt state law because they know that they can get a dysfunctional Congress to maybe pass a watered-down, barely recognizable privacy law that probably only adds more notice and consent to the system.
All right, I see a lot of head nodding.
No, I think it's 100% accurate, and we are seeing a lot of posturing. I think the way to think of it is data is valuable, but data is a toxic asset. It has risk. And companies have to realize that it's not just collect it all, but if you collect it, you risk it being stolen, you risk using it. I used Waze as an example, right? Surveillance-based system, but the data is valuable for what, 10 minutes? And then maybe they need only to sample, what, out of 100 cars? I mean, we could invent lots of ways to build a Waze-like surveillance system to preserve privacy. And it is true that companies want to collect the data, all the data they can. We're living in a world where it's really cheaper to save all the data than to throw some of it away. I mean, data storage is so cheap. And unless they're forced to, it's not going to happen. And certainly, I mean, there's a new California privacy law that is going to be decided in the next few months. And it's going to be watered down. Europe right now is the regulatory superpower. And I think looking towards them is where we're going to get a lot of benefits. Right? All those notices you're seeing on your computer now are because of Europe. If Europe passes stronger laws, starts enforcing them, we're going to see the benefits. Unfortunately, that's the best I got right now.
But Harry, what about what we hear from so many of the technology giants who they say this is going to stifle innovation and competition? No?
There's a balance. And I think Senator Warner really started that discussion really well. There is a balance to be struck, and I think one of the things that's easy to overlook is that, yeah, you can talk about the technology giants, but let's not forget Main Street, because laws that address consumer privacy and the collection of information about individuals, well, every single organization collects information about individuals. When we registered for this briefing, this conference, information about you was collected. And the kind of laws we apply to the collection and management of personal information are going to hit every single kind of organization, every kind of company, and the kind of ease and the kind of access that we all have gotten used to in dealing with companies of every size, that access is going to become less easy to manage. And so there's a trade-off here. And there's also a trade-off here because the U.S. is a very litigious society. As if we haven't noticed, we have a lot of lawyers here in Washington and elsewhere, and we litigate a lot. And any kind of open door is going to lead to lawyers coming in and saying, let me litigate on that. Europe doesn't quite have that, not yet at least. And so you're going to have a very comprehensive regulatory regime in Europe that is very thorough, very thoughtful, not taking away anything from Europe, but applied here in the United States, and we will be at each other's throats for decades. And we will stifle innovation if we're not careful. And so I think the value of having a federal debate about this issue and taking something on after California has acted in an interesting way, in a trailblazer sort of way, is that to have a federal debate with all the glory of our democratic system is going to be valuable to us. There's a reason for that kind of democracy. There's a reason for the states as laboratories, but if every state goes the way of California, we will be in trouble because it will be not functional and we will be in danger of violating the Interstate Commerce Clause. There's a reason we have a federal system, and we better get on with a federal debate about how to balance all these interests and get it right.
Well, let's go to the audience now because I'm sure you have some questions. You would raise your hand and identify yourself. Gentleman right here.
Hi, I'm Joe Lanuti. I'm a Georgetown law student. I have a question.
You should go into privacy law.
What do you say to the consumer who's saying, yeah, I understand on some level that Google Maps and Google is tracking my every move. It knew I went on vacation, actually. But in the big scheme of things, Google doesn't really care about my individual data. They just care about, big data trends, the aggregation. So what do I have to fear as an individual about my personal privacy?
So it's harmless. Huh? Who wants to take that? Bruce?
Rights are hard. We tend not to notice them until they're gone. And privacy is something that we take for granted until it disappears. I mean, Google actually does care about individuals. I mean, they want to target you as uniquely as possible. That's how they make the most profit. And that data is not used in your interest, right? It is used to manipulate you. It is used for persuasion. That's what advertising is. These are hard conversations to have because some of them are technical. And that's why I tend to think of privacy, we shouldn't think of it as a property right, something I can give away in exchange for services, but more as a fundamental right. Right? I cannot sell my kidney, even though I might want to. And we do that for reasons. So I think it's a hard conversation to have. There are things you can say. I mean, in my book, I talk about privacy necessary for human dignity, for democracy, for liberty, for fairness, for justice. Make all these arguments. But in the end, I think as citizens, we really do care about our privacy, even though as consumers, we tend to forget at the point of purchase.
I'll only add very briefly that you say you're a student at Georgetown Law, which is wonderful, but 2 of your professors who work in privacy have written on this question exactly. Yeah. Paul Ohm, who teaches various privacy classes at Georgetown, spoke about how even though Google wants that kind of more anonymized, not specifically focused to you, the tech tools that they use to anonymize that data are faulty, meaning it's very easy to re-identify information. Julie Cohen, who's been writing about privacy since long before, for many, many years, and is one of the lions in our field, also spoke about how even if you personally are not concerned, the collection of this data affects your behavior. And you may not see it daily when you're using Waze, but it affects your behavior when you feel that you recognize you're being surveilled. When a virtual environment that the internet tries to create is full of data collection, we behave in different ways, and there are actual real studies that show that it is. So you're in the best place in the world to learn about the consumer values that are implicated by this collection, and how that argument that it's really only anonymized data that they want is really just a canard.
All right. Another question? Lady in red right here, or in the back, that's fine.
Good morning. My name is Marcella Sawaya, and I'm with the federal government. I had a question about if you're seeing any trends in people being less likely to engage in different democratic processes. Like, you used to go out and sign a petition. It was just your pen, paper. Now you sign a petition, 13 other listservs have your name. And you start to get information that's tangentially related to the petition you signed online. Or protests, you attend a protest. Now you're no longer necessarily anonymous in a crowd.
Yes, there have been numerous studies. You can search for them, that people's behavior do change, especially people who are marginalized. Right? For the white men, less. For anybody marginalized, certainly.
Fascinating. I think we have time for one more. Maybe the lady in red here. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you so much. I'm Spencer Bell. I'm a recent Georgetown Law graduate, and I'm here representing the Electronic Privacy Information Center. One of the things I wanted to touch back on is the balance between innovation and privacy protection and striking that fine line. And I wanted to ask about your thoughts on Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. Do you think it's something that can be reconciled with the need to create a meaningful regulative framework right now? Do you think it has to be repealed entirely and started again from the ground up? Just what are your thoughts on that in terms of finding a way to provide meaningful accountability in this difficult point that we're in terms of balancing freedom of expression, innovation, and really getting in the program with what the digital needs are today? Thank you.
Well, Harriet, we haven't heard from you.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for wearing red as well. And I also want to say that I'm a very proud advisory board member of the Electronic Privacy Information Center. They do great work. And I think there's a way to reconcile, and I think there's a way to build. I think the points that were made earlier about transparency, making sure, I love the idea of privacy as a social paradigm, and I used to actually teach at Georgetown. I taught a course on privacy and trust, because at the end of the day, when you actually ask consumers about what is it about privacy, you don't really have a national organization of privacy advocates around this country. There's not a grassroots movement on privacy. Why is that? I've asked myself that question, why is that? And I think part of the answer is that we conceptualize privacy individually as lots of different things. And so it's very balkanized. And so if I care about privacy as the protection of my physical self, that's a very different conception than my privacy, informational privacy, when I give information about myself away to somebody who might use it in a way that, with a third party that I might not understand. Those are different conceptions. And so I think you build on that existing law and increase transparency, increase accountability for the usage of information, increase the focus on security without over-regulating. I think that's the balance that I would say is workable.
And that's going to have to be the last word. We're out of time. Thank you for your wonderful questions, and please thank my terrific panel, Bruce, Harriet, and Ari. Thank you.